The film begins with a moment that is both beautiful and terrifying. Snow is falling, white, quiet, and deadly. A couple, John and Rachel, are lost in each other, so much so that they don't even remember their little boy Nick. He's alone at home. He approaches the window, climbs up, and then a silence descends. The child falls. He dies. An innocent death in the snow. This is where the first chapter begins. Grips, that is, shock. This isn't just a story, it is a mental catastrophe. John is a psychologist, but his wife Rachel can't bear the pain. She falls into depression, she is hospitalized, and when she returns, nothing feels normal anymore. John tries to heal her. He himself wants her to undergo exposure therapy to confront her fears. They go to an old cabin in a dense forest. The name of that place is Eden Forest. This is where the story begins to turn toward fear. On the way, Rachel has to cross a bridge. She is scared and trembles, but she continues. Once in the forest, she has a panic attack. Her condition worsens. John, formerly a counselor, begins to lose his senses. He begins to feel that Rachel's suffering has touched him. One night, he wakes up with a strange wound on his hand, as if something is eating away at him from within. The forest is strange, scary, and seems to be hiding a secret. John sees a dying eaglet eaten by its mother. Rachel witnesses this, and a look of grief returns to her face. John begins to sense that Rachel isn't just depressed, she is hiding something else, or her behavior is changing. Sometimes she is very gentle, sometimes she is suddenly violent, and this is where chapter 2 of Pain begins, the face of pain that neither medicine nor words can cure. Rachel is now completely different. She forcefully demands physical contact with John. John avoids it, but this escape no longer seems possible. He himself is slowly becoming absorbed by the dark spirit of this forest. Rachel says, "I am fine," but her eyes tell something else. John finds an old book Rachel wrote. It contains stories of witchcraft and women being burned. Rachel believes that women are evil. Their nature is evil. John tries to reason with her, but his words no longer have any effect. Rachel's mental state has deteriorated so much that she transforms her guilt into anger. She believes John will leave her, and out of this fear, she attacks him, injures him, and ties a heavy stone to his leg to prevent him from running away. The fear is no longer just mental, it has become physical. This forest is now devouring relationships, and this is where the story descends to a new depth. Now, in the second part of the story, we reach a point where the pain and madness begin to break the boundaries. The cabin in the woods where Rachel once came to write her thesis has now become the home of her mental breakdown. John has now completely immersed himself in Rachel's therapy. But this therapy was no longer just a cure, it had become a black hole, sucking them both in. Rachel's behavior had become even more strange. Sometimes she would insist on being physical with John, and sometimes she would suddenly start harming herself. Her face was no longer that of a human being, but that of a terrifying being afraid of itself. John began to understand that he himself was drowning in this pain. One day, he woke up to find thorns piercing his hands. Blood was flowing, pain was eroding, and so was his self-confidence. John encouraged Rachel to try walking the rocky path in the woods again, thinking that maybe exposure theory might work. But that day, on the way, they see a baby eaglet lying on the ground, its mother eating it. The scene flashes through Rachel's mind like lightning. She remembers her son's death and begins to cry out loud. But this is the turning point where John begins to realize that he can't solve all this. He is a therapist, but he himself is becoming a patient. He has become afraid of his wife. He tries to stay away from her, but every time, Rachel somehow pulls him back to her, sometimes in the name of love, sometimes in the name of guilt, and then comes that moment. Rachel's true nature is revealed. She admits that she saw her son fall from the window, but she did nothing. She didn't save him. She was so lost in the moment, so immersed in her physical pleasure, that she wasn't aware of her son's life. Hearing this, John is devastated, but even this shattering isn't complete. Rachel's next move shatters him. She attacks John. She ties him to a heavy iron rod and strikes his thighs. John writhes in pain, screaming, but no one in the forest listens. Rachel was now completely lost. She was living in her own world, a world where pain is worship and repentance is salvation. She had accepted her child's death as a sin, and now she was punishing herself, and John had become just a pawn in that punishment. The story now reaches its darkest point, with the third chapter still to come. As the darkness of the forest deepened, John's breathing became more and more labored, the thumping grew louder, the heavy piece of wood tied to his feet dragged him across the ground again and again. But this time he wasn't ready to give up. There was a different fire in his eyes, a fire that arose from guilt, shame, and pain. Rachel, now completely out of her senses, sat in a corner inside the cabin. Her face was soaked in sweat and tears, and her hands trembled. She recognized the monster growing within her, the monster that had convinced her she was the root of evil. She began to hate herself. Amidst this madness John somehow managed to drag the heavy piece of wood inside the cabin. There was no fear in his eyes, but determination. He looked at Rachel, now broken, shattered. John went to her, picked her up, but now she didn't scream. The girl just cried. I let her die because I was simply exhausted. In my own hunger, in my own pain, I had forgotten how to be a mother. John's eyes filled with tears, but there is no sympathy left in him, no anger, just a void. He knows there is only one way out. Slowly he begins to strangle Rachel. Rachel doesn't resist. Perhaps the guilt within her soul wanted this, and she surrenders to it. Rachel's breath stops. John silently picks up her body and carries it outside to a place where many lifeless, decaying bodies already lie buried in the mud. He sets it there, lights a fire, and stares without a word, his eyes completely blank. Now, in the final scene, we see John descending the hill. He emerges from the smoke, surrounded by figures of women. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, their faces obscured, but there is a peace in their movements. They all look at him as if forgiving him, or perhaps as if they recognize the demon within him. The figures slowly disappear, and John walks out of the forest, broken, exhausted, but free from any rage, as if he'd thrown his inner demons into the fire, as if he was no longer human, just an empty shell, touched by both life and death. Here ends Entrust's journey, which takes us through a couple's crumbling relationship, a mother's self-absorption, and a husband's silent, burning pain. This isn't just a horror film. It is a mental torture, a pain that can't be understood in words, only through experience.